to the second meeting of the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology for this session. Before us today, we have the Honourable James Moore, the Minister of Industry. And we also have from the Department of Industry, John Nubley, a Deputy Minister, and Paul Haluka, the Director General of Marketplace Framework Policy Branch. Welcome, gentlemen. Also from the Canadian Border Services Agency, we have Martin Baldick, who's the Vice President of Operations Branch. And from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we have Superintendent Eric Slynn, Director General of Support Services for Federal Policing. We will get right to the witnesses' statements right now. We'll go to the Minister first, but just we have some new members of the committee. We end up in rooms with different clocks at different settings, and so we'll always take the BlackBerry time because all of it synchronized due to the House of Commons as the time that we operate by. Just clear that up in case you're looking over my shoulder on the clock behind me. And now we'll go to the Minister's comments. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, you know how this will go. The witnesses will give their testimony, and then we'll go to the usual rounds of rotation. Minister, please go ahead with your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, colleagues. And first, congratulations to the new critics, certainly from the opposition, but also the new government members of this committee. As you know, over the sweep of the past many years of this place, the Industry Committee has been known as a committee that tackles some of the more challenging and in-depth policy questions of the day. And so to have members of this committee, leaders of all of our respective parties, to entrust you with the tasks of some of this legislation, which can be pretty complex and technical, is a testament to your abilities. And I look forward to working with you both today and beyond on a number of matters that are before us. And also, I would say, in particular about this piece of legislation, having read the testimony that was offered before the committee, before the new members were brought to this committee, and also the debate in the House of Commons, I know that this is a piece of legislation about which there's I think a commonality of view that something needs to be done, and there's general support for this legislation, though I know that the opposition is looking at possibly bringing forward some amendments, and the government members have expressed an openness to accepting some amendments. So hopefully this will be a good beginning to a policy process that I think will serve Canadians well. So again, Mr. Chair, I want to thank you for inviting me to appear to speak about Bill C-8, the Combating Counterfeit Products Act, and our government's work to stop pirated goods from entering the Canadian economy. As the committee well knows, our government worked hard to modernize Canada's intellectual property laws in order to bring them into the 21st century. We promised to modernize the Copyright Act, and our government delivered on that promise. We introduced and passed a bill that balanced the needs of creators with those of consumers. But this was only part of the solution that was needed. La mondialisation continue.
Globalization continues to open up new markets and expand trade around the world. As you know, Canada recently signed the most comprehensive trade agreement in history with the European Union, which will provide preferential market access to more than 500 million consumers and to its annual $17 million in economic activity. Technology continues to change and has revolutionized the way we conduct business, which has also made trade faster and more sophisticated. The world is quickly realizing the importance of modern, responsive and effective laws to ensure sustained economic growth and job creation.
Goods and resources to a few close allies on our continent. In today's modern economy, we are trading physical goods and intellectual property to more countries and more people and more often. With this increased trade comes great opportunity and reward. But in trying to maximize these opportunities, we cannot ignore increased risks, namely those presented by the theft and resale of Canadian intellectual property. We have taken the necessary steps through the Copyright Modernization Act to bring our domestic, and that's the, of course, keyword, domestic copyright laws in line with international standards. But as the committee well knows, having studied this issue on several occasions, work still remains in ensuring that, goods which violate the Canadian intellectual property laws not be allowed into this country for commercial resale. Not only do such goods undermine the business success of legitimate Canadian companies, but they also represent a threat to the health and well-being of our families. I have, by the way, here a number of examples of counterfeit goods that have been captured coming into Canada: counterfeit batteries, counterfeit clothes, a counterfeit Sidney Crosby jersey, his Olympic jersey, batteries, a number of items that cross boundaries, not only in terms of national identity, but hollowing out the intellectual property of Canadian companies, but also offer items that bring with them a degree of public safety measures and public safety concerns, rather, that need to be taken into account, such as circuit breakers, batteries, extension cords, and so on, that are counterfeit and would not meet Canadian standards for sale. Notre projet de loi modifiera la loi sur la marque.
This bill will amend the Trademarks Act and the Copyright Act, and will give rights holders, border service officers, and law enforcement the tools they need to work together to directly confront the growing threat of international counterfeiting and piracy.
Rights are a constant risk. Counterfeit and pirated goods are increasingly finding their way through our borders and into the Canadian marketplace. The retail value of counterfeit goods seized by the RCMP has steadily increased from $7.6 million in 2005 to $38 million in 2012. That's a 400% increase just in the past few years. And that's money and jobs that are being taken away from Canadians. And to give you context of how counterfeit goods are affecting Canadians, I'll give you some examples. First of all, counterfeit goods threaten the safety of Canadians. We're not only talking about counterfeit Gucci bags that are sold on the street. These pirated goods can be a real threat to our daily lives. There have been many reports of counterfeit airbags, counterfeit toothpaste, children's toys, as well as food and beverages that put the health and safety of our families at risk. Second, counterfeit goods have been often linked with serious organized crime. Criminal groups use the profits from pirated goods to fund their criminal activities that we all are very concerned about. And third, counterfeit and pirated goods are a threat to economic growth and jobs in Canada. When counterfeiters steal intellectual property for commercial purposes, it is Canadian businesses that are most affected. This is not just through lost revenue from products gone unsold, but also the damage done to brand integrity. When criminals bring in counterfeit and pirated goods to this country, they are looking to make a quick profit, and they can very easily tarnish the strong reputations forged by quality Canadian brands. Prenons l'exemple de...
Take, for example, Canada Goose, which has built a reputation as a world-leading manufacturer of high-quality winter wear. Here's a company that has spent valuable time, energy, and money to create a brand that is known the world over and is synonymous with quality. That being said, last year, Canada Goose's branding took a huge hit from subpar knockoffs coming into Canada.
Chairman, it's not just our government that knows that actions need to be taken. Of course, stakeholders have overwhelmingly offered their support for this legislation that we're here to discuss. For example, the Vice President of Global Marketing at Canada Goose and co-chair of the Canadian Intellectual Property Council said the following, quote, "Canadians have long been victims of illicit counterfeit trade, and the Combating Counterfeit Products Act is welcome news for consumers, businesses, and retailers alike." The Food and Consumer Products of Canada said, quote, "Counterfeit goods are a very real threat to the health and safety of Canadians. Their presence in the marketplace pose a risk to Canadians and hurts our economy. We applaud this government for taking strong and decisive action to address this." And the Canadian manufacturers and exporters said, quote, "We congratulate the government on taking action to improve the business conditions of companies investing and creating jobs right here in our communities." So the need for the bill is quite clear. In order to help stop the spread of counterfeiting and piracy, this legislation gives Canadian rights holders and law enforcement agencies the tools that they require to confront this threat at the border and to take action against those who profit from the commercial trade of counterfeit and pirated goods. Plus particulièrement, le projet de loi...
Specifically, the bill will give the authority to border officers to detain suspected counterfeit shipments and notify rights holders of the detention, whether the suspected goods are being imported or exported.
Called a request for assistance. which will allow rights holders to work with border officers and request that they detain commercial shipments suspected of containing counterfeit goods. In addition, this bill will provide rights holders with new tools to protect their own intellectual property rights and the ability to take legal recourse against infringers. It adds new civil causes of action that cover manufacturing, possessing, importing, exporting, and attempting to export counterfeit goods for commercial purposes. This will give rights holders a chance to stop infringers before the goods in question are sold in the market. Ces changements sont nécessaires.
These changes are necessary and overdue. But I want to make it clear that this bill is intended to target only those who violate intellectual property with the intention to make money from it. Personal use of counterfeited goods will not be targeted.
To the concerns of consumers and stakeholders, and to ensure the security of our economy, the health and safety of Canadians, and also to help stop the criminal activity that is profiting from this trade are central to this legislation as well. So, Mr. Chair, I want to thank the committee again for taking the time to study this important bill, and I would urge all members of the committee to return this bill to the House as soon as is possible so that we can ensure that Canadian rights holders, customs officers, and law enforcement agencies have the tools that they need to fight counterfeiting and piracy domestically at our borders. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Is there any other supplementary opening remarks from any of the other witnesses?
No, Mr. Chair, but I would point out that Minister Blaney, the Minister of Public Safety, was to be here as well, but he was called away to another meeting, so he couldn't attend. But we have two folks here from his department who are prepared to answer any of the technical questions on the enforcement side. And, of course, I have officials here from the Department of Industry who will answer other questions as well.
Thank you very much for the clarification, Minister. Now we'll go to our first round of questioning, 7 minutes per member, and Mr. Lake.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for coming here today. And I think I'm going to start, if I could, on just a sort of a broad level. Obviously, in the speech from the throne, Canadians will have had the opportunity to see the government's focus on consumer issues, and wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on how this bill might align with that focus on consumers.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think it's self-evident, and not only do we want to empower consumers, as we say very often, the best way in which to empower consumers in our society is to give them more power, money, and control, and the choices that they want to make in how they want to live their lives. And we believe in doing that through tax relief and economic freedom and personal responsibility, but at the same time, protecting consumers from those who would do them harm. As I said, we have a number of examples here of products that would do consumers harm, particularly when they're presented in the marketplace, when they look absolutely identical to the parallel projects that are put forward by the actual manufacturers of these products. And there's an example here is the former minister for the Olympics. I think anybody passing through a store would see this jersey and would think that this looks exactly as it ought to, and it actually feels the same. The fabric feels the same. The numbers are twill. Everything looks as it ought to. But these are all are counterfeit goods that are bogus, that are in our marketplace, that are ripping off consumers and also taking great Canadian brands and maligning them. And it's not only a problem, I think, for the sake of national identity, but when companies like Canada Goose and others are having their products ripped off, and then people take these products home and they use them and they malfunction, and they tell their friends and their friends' friends and their friends' friends' friends not to buy that product because it's defective, it hurts the economy. And certainly in protecting consumers, we've heard stories in the past, some of them in Canada, some of them in other jurisdictions around the world, of unsafe toothpaste, of toys that have lead in them. These are things that are self-evident we need to fight against, and this is why we need legislation like what is before you, so that those whose rights are being violated, they have the recourse in order to protect the intellectual property that is being abused in the marketplace. So as an aspect of the broader consumer agenda, I think it's the benefits of the legislation are self-evident.
All right. You mentioned, and of course, as a former Heritage Minister, you were quite involved in the copyright legislation. Maybe you could speak a little bit to first of all, the impact that that legislation has had in this area, and maybe how this legislation complements the work that's been done on the Copyright Modernization Act.
Sure. Of course, the Copyright Modernization Act, which spanned two parliaments, the previous parliament and the current parliament, which we adopted, actually after having considered a great deal of amendments from opposition parties, some of which were included in the legislation, I should point out as well. It was also arrived at after a great deal of consultation, and you'll remember that when Minister Clement was the Minister of Industry, you were the Parliamentary Secretary to him at the time, I was the Minister of Heritage, and we went across the country, consulted with Canadians, drew in ideas on how to best address the need for a modernized copyright legislation, and we arrived, I think, at a pretty effective, if I may say, piece of legislation that protects Canadian intellectual property rights. What this legislation is about is not the domestic aspect of intellectual property protection, but international, which is to say empowering the CBSA, empowering the RCMP with the tools that they need to actually prosecute, and also empowering rights holders with the mechanisms that they require to trigger action at a border when they know their goods are being pirated, counterfeited, and their intellectual property is being betrayed in the marketplace. So this is an obvious follow-through. We have the domestic legislation and its teeth and its infrastructure to protect intellectual property domestically. This is about protecting intellectual property on an international scale.
Sure. In your opening statement, this question may actually be more a question for the officials, kind of getting into the details, but talked about the increase from $7.6 million in 2005 to $38 million in 2012. That's a pretty significant increase. Can you elaborate, or could someone elaborate, maybe give us some idea of where that increase is coming from, what particular areas of the economy would be contributing to that increase, and maybe as a follow-up to that, if there's time, does that sort of profile look different in different parts of the world in terms of where counterfeit would have its impact?
Perhaps I could speak to that. You're quite right. There has been an increase since 2005. As to the types of products that we're seeing, I mean, they essentially run the gamut, although I think the last number of years, apparel and footwear seems to be the most prolific. You're looking at about 49% is the statistics that we have on our public website.
Okay. And in other parts of the world, is do they face the same problem? I imagine it's more of a developed world problem than a developing world problem in terms of the source countries, or the recipient countries, I guess, in a sense.
I can't speak to other countries other than perhaps the United States faces very much the same situation that we do. So I can't speak specifically to other countries' situations there.
Okay, and finally, maybe it might actually be coming back at you again here. The statement in the opening statement, in order to help to stop the spread of counterfeiting and piracy, the bill will give Canadian rights holders and law enforcement the tools they require to confront this threat. What's the difference between the tools you have now and the tools you require?
Well, I think with our colleagues at CBSA, now we have that extra tool that we can use, controlled deliveries, which is an effective law enforcement tool for us to carry out goods that are going to potentially organized crime figures or individuals that are prolifically involved in this type of activity. So in one sense, it brings us closer to our colleagues at CBSA. We work more closely, and I think we can produce greater results. It also gives us the flexibility in that in the law enforcement world that we're in today, is organized crime is extremely diverse. They're not singular. They don't look just particularly at drugs. They're looking at multiple pieces of contraband. So this gives the RCMP the opportunity to be much more flexible in how we prioritize our operations and how we target those organized crime groups for greater effect, for greater disruption.
Thank you very much. That's all the time in that for that question round. Now over to Madam Charlton for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for spending some time with us here today. You were quite right in your opening remarks that we do indeed share your concerns about counterfeiting and piracy, and we're pleased that we've got the bill before us here today so that we can look at it in more detail and make sure that we are actually addressing the concerns that have been raised both by businesses and by consumers. And of course, it's a particular concern for us when we're talking about matters that affect the health and safety of Canadians. In my comments, I want to focus a little bit on the enforcement side, where I have some questions. First of all, let me just. I think I'm right when I say that it used to be the courts that made the determination about whether something was counterfeit or not, or whether it was a pirated good. And the courts used to have some difficulty in making that determination from time to time. Now we're taking the courts out of that process, or at least diminishing the court's role, and we're asking Canadian Border Services agents to make that determination. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the additional training that border officials will receive, what kind of additional resources you'll make available so that they can take on this new role. And I wonder whether you can also talk a little bit about what gives you the confidence that our border officials will be able to make the determinations that courts found difficult.
I'll let Mr. Bolduc answer on behalf of Public Safety.
Essentiellement, ce que le projet de loi
Well, what this bill provides us with in terms of additional tools is the following. There will be a system under which trademarks and copyright owners will be able to tell us that they actually own those rights. Our officers, on a daily basis, inspect various goods that cross the border. And they're in a position to be able to inspect those deliveries where you can find those counterfeit goods. Now, under this bill, let's say, for example, that there's a suspicion that there are counterfeit goods in those deliveries. We can then verify whether or not a request for assistance was given to us by the rights holders. And then in that case, we can share samples with them so that those companies are able to seek remedies. And also to give the border officials the authority then to detain those goods while the copyright owner has an opportunity to go before the courts.
Minister, you know, because we've raised it in the House, we've had conversations elsewhere about this, but border officials are already having a difficult time managing the very serious mandates with which they deal every day, such as stopping illegal weapons and drugs, stopping potentially threatening individuals, and other things like that. I'm finding it a bit difficult to see how this bill will be implemented and how those additional responsibilities will be dealt with in light of the fact that CBSA is dealing with a $143 million budget cut that was in the last budget. Do you plan to reverse those cuts? I mean, what are the other priorities that border officials can now drop because they've got these additional responsibilities? And can you guarantee that adequate funding will be provided to ensure that the other functions that border guards are now performing won't be impacted as a result of the passage of Bill C-8?
You're quite right. This is an addition of greater responsibility on our borders, but it's an obligation that we think is expected by Canadians. However, through the sweep of our government from 2006 through until today, we have overall increased funding for border security across this country. Yes, most recently there was a reduction, but if you look at where we were in 2006 compared to where we are in 2013 and where we are going forward, we have net increased our support for border services agencies, increased hiring, and certainly this will require new training and new approaches to how they do their job, given the new powers that are being provided in this legislation. But I would say that I know that the government would not bring forward this legislation without having consulted with CBSA, with RCMP, and with others to ensure that these new powers wouldn't be offered without the adequate resources to have them realized on the ground. And we have done our due diligence in that regard. John Nutley said on your previous question that he had something else to add.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Chair, I just wanted to emphasize that the role of the CBSA is, of course, strengthened to identify suspicious goods. And now under the Trademark Act and the Copyright Act, this can be done across the whole supply chain, which previously was not possible. And ultimately, and this is my second point, the court actually decides, as you were suggesting, Honourable Member, as to whether the good is actually counterfeit or not. And I do want to stress that the courts can and do actually award compensatory and punitory damages in that context.
So can I just clarify, Minister, I think I just heard you say that there will be additional training required for our border agents and that there will be adequate resources. So does that mean you will be reversing some of the cuts or at least providing some additional resources to CBSA?
They have the resources adequate to effectively put in place this legislation and protect our borders. As I said, we arrived at the budget decisions that we made in consultation with CBSA, in consultation with the RCMP and others. And we've put forward legislation that would not in any way diminish their capacity to do what they're already doing, and they have the resources necessary to take on these new responsibilities. These are powers, by the way, that they've requested, that organizations who are supporting this legislation that I've mentioned have supported, and we have every confidence that the CBSA can fully implement this and protect Canadians with the resources that they have.
So they have additional responsibilities, but a flatline budget. Okay, I'm just going to leave it there, and I'll just move on to something else. As you know, the government now also has or will soon have the ability to declare which public servants are going to be deemed essential for the purposes of collective bargaining. Are you anticipating that border guards will be deemed essential?
I don't have any comment on that, but I know that Minister Blenny would be more than glad to appear and discuss that issue with you.
Chair, can I just ask for clarification? How do we go about, do I need to introduce a motion to ask Minister Blaney to appear in light of the minister's comments, or is he happy to do that? You already know that, or?
No, you can have a motion. You can invite whoever you want.
Would you like to, can I move a motion now, or do you need notice for that, or how would you like me to proceed?
I think if you want to move a motion, you can, and I don't think there's any resistance at all in that regard. Okay. Anyway, I think it was just simply you got called away the meeting, so we can just reschedule.
Okay, in that case, may I move a motion that the committee request Minister Blaney to appear?
You sure can. I think you'll find agreement.
Terrific. Thank you.
Okay, now move on to Mr. McCollum for 7 minutes.
Well, thank you, Minister, for being here and for, I suppose, moving forward on something that we were about to aggressively move forward. Hopefully we can expedite this in a way that we can protect the public from such things as you brought today. The one, 2 lines of questioning I really would like to know about, and perhaps it goes to one of the other witnesses here, is when you held up the circuit breaker, that's my background, is construction, and I just wonder from those of you who are currently in the enforcement business whether or not there's a great amount of product, counterfeit product, hitting the market and posing a real safety problem to the building of new construction.
I can't speak specifically to the links between counterfeit goods and the construction industry. I think we're more concerned, which perhaps goes into the construction industry, is the safety of products right across the gamut. Anything that can potentially harm the public, that puts public safety at jeopardy, whether it be in construction or apparel or toothpaste, that would be a focus for us, but I can't make those direct linkages for you.
Maybe another way to approach this is to ask this question that I couldn't help but write down when in thinking about this is, can you give us a sense of how deep the investigations go? How?
As well on the last.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed that. Sorry, Chair. Sorry, Mr. Nowley.
I just wanted to address the issue of trends and talk a little more broadly about some of the trends in counterfeiting. As you all know, it used to be primarily confined to luxury goods. I think that's the sense here in Canada and many countries. Handbags, sunglasses, and clothing. While these are certainly still being copied, counterfeiting has been expanded into a wide array of industries, including car parts, food and beverages, electrical components, toys, and electronics, to name a few. In short, all types of goods are really being counterfeited today. I wanted to also raise that there's a trend away from bulk or container shipments towards small packets. This is due to e-commerce, if you like, electronic commerce, and the counterfeiter's ability to sell directly to customers. So that's another trend that seems to be happening as we move forward on this.
And that is a good segue into the question I was just starting to ask, and that is, can you give us a sense, any of you, how deep these investigations go? Because they really start out in a production facility where the good is knocked off, where it's made. Then it moves on to distribution, someone decides that they're going to get involved in distributing this kind of material, and there's that whole chain of events, that value chain happens, and how deep, when you intercept something, how deep has the investigation been, and how much further will it go?
I guess it's not unlike any criminal investigation that we partake in. We go as deep as we can to collect the necessary evidence to bring it before the courts. But it would really depend on a host of factors, whether it was an international investigation in scope, so then we have to rely on our international partners to obtain evidence. We have to use the MLAT process. Is it a domestic investigation? What's the product? Are we involved with multiple other agencies? It's a complicated question, but it gets the same attention as any investigation. If I can link it to organized crime types investigations, those are much more in-depth, require more work, and sometimes require more resources to get into those large-scale organized crime investigations.
Do you work with international police forces and other investigators from around the world where these goods are coming from? Because I would make the presumption that most of these are coming offshore, in from offshore. Am I correct in assuming that?
I think that's fair to say. The RCMP has liaison officers posted around the world. We leverage those liaison officers to build relationships with foreign law enforcement so that we're in a better position to collect the intelligence in support of operations back at home here.
And the increase, whenever I cross the border, and I go frequently in and out of the United States, I see the kind of scanning equipment that exists, the new scanning equipment that is in place for our border security, and the enhanced technologies that people have. Does this play a major role in providing you with the tools you need?
It does, and we will leverage that technology, but rely also on the training we'll provide our officers in detecting counterfeit goods and leveraging with the RCMP also expertise that is out there from the rights holder, but also from other border management organization in the world that have intellectual property right legislation and also build on their expertise.
Just switching gears, if I do have time left, less than a minute. Minister, you had mentioned that generally that stakeholders have been very supportive of this bill coming forward. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that in terms of specific types of industries? I know you, in your comments, made reference to industry associations. Has there been any contact from any one particular sector of our economy that stands out in your mind?
Well, just this morning, as a matter of fact, I was at a meeting in Toronto with Jason Myers of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. We were talking about the Canada-Europe trade agreement, and then we had a side conversation. I said that I was coming here later today, and he was very enthusiastic about it because this is it's going to become an increasingly important challenge that we tackle as we go to over 1 billion people on the planet now with whom we have a liberalized trade agreement. We've gone from 14 to 42 countries with which we have an FTA now, and it's going to be incredibly important that we protect the interests of Canadian businesses and also protect families from goods that are coming in from certain parts of the planet that are dangerous and counterfeit and are becoming a source of financial infrastructure for organized crime. I mean, all these are real threats and real problems, and they undermine Canadian firms and from time to time jeopardize public safety. So, as I said, I have a long list, and these are all organizations that represent many individual firms,
Minister,
all these.
My apologies, Minister. We're quite a ways over. I was waiting for you to finish.
Sure, go ahead.
Have to go. Sorry about that. Now on to Madam Sgro for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, and welcome, Minister Moore. It sounds like it's been a very interesting time for both of us here, so I look forward to working with you on it. A couple of questions. Run us through the border issue. I visited and had tours in previous positions I've had here, and I have viewed your ability to X-ray trucks and various things, so you know what the contents are. But you can't do that. You can only do that when there's a particular signal that gives you an idea that something might be coming through. Now that's when we're talking about drugs and smuggling people. But when you're talking about many of the goods that the minister referenced and other things, it just seems to me that it's going to be an amazingly difficult job without an awful lot more resources. So we know the reality of where we are with that issue. What else are you getting in C8 that is going to help you to be able to decrease from this 38 million? If it's 38 million now, it'll probably be up to 60 million in another year. So what tools do you have now with C8, if C8 is passed, that you didn't have before?
We will rely on intelligence and targeting. Trying to intercept a shipment of illegal drugs, there's a lot of similarities between that and a shipment of counterfeit goods. We will rely on indicators, try to leverage that information, which we do day in, day out, on the many hundreds of thousands of shipments that we clear at land border every year, and give the ability what this projet de loi nous permet d'avoir, c'est d'avoir.
So under this bill, we'll have the capacity to detain those shipments and then to contact the rights holders, those trademark or copyright holders, so that they can then take measures before the courts. We already have the system that we need in order to be able to target those goods and intercept them. Now, you're quite right in saying that X-raying a shipment of sweaters doesn't necessarily tell us whether they're actually real or counterfeit sweaters. But we also use the various indicators that we'll have at our disposal in order to be able to target those shipments and then intercept them.
Quite a significant job ahead of you in order to be able to do what we're talking about here today. A lot of the items when we go into, I'll just throw out the dollar store, no disrespect meant to the dollar store. It's a place I'm sure we all go to. But I'm always very wary of what I buy there. Now, when you look at electric extension cords and so on, I mean, you know, they'll have the CBSA or whatever it is there, CCA on there. But there's, how do we protect consumers against buying fraudulent items like that? What's in C8? Is there anything in C8 that's going to do that?
Well, certainly there are powers, there are penalties. Those people, those whose products are being counterfeited and improperly represented can now be prosecuted. We empower those the victims. There are penalties that are imposed, and this is the regime that was asked for, frankly, by those organizations that represent those firms that are being ripped off. We spoke with them, met with them, and based on the consultations, they came back and they said these are the kind of powers that we think would make the most sense to protect us, and those are the powers that are enumerated in Bill C8.
So clearly you think that by broadening the civil causes of action, it's going to act as a deterrent on counterfeiting activities?
Certainly. I mean, over time, you'd have to have some case law on which to point to and clear examples, but it begins with the imposition of legislation that creates the power that can be exercised.
Just to go in a bit of a different area for a minute. The word in C8, some of the issues that have been raised, I believe, to you as a minister, and I'm sure to all of us, in regards to the generic pharmaceutical companies, and the word that was in the bill with respect to distinctiveness could undermine or eliminate existing case law to the detriment of pharmacists, patients, and generic pharmaceutical attendants. That's here. It's to do with a trademark. I understand that the industry has been in touch with the minister, and wondering if you have any suggestions that could remedy some of those problems before C8 gets finalized?
The new definition is the technical explanation from my department. The new language of the definition aligns with the agreements on trade-related aspects of intellectual property, or TRIPS, as well as the case law with the Trademark Opposition Board decisions. So the purpose of the language, the change in the language, is to modernize and to bring us in line with other legal expectations.
But do you share the concerns that the generic industry has raised?
We weren't concerned at the point of drafting. I'm not sure if you want to make more comments about this, John.
Well, in this regard, just building on what the minister has said, again, this change was really done in the context of trying to modernize the bill overall, and specifically with respect to the word distinctiveness. Really, this involves a change from wares to goods, and from adapted so as to distinguish them from, it's from wares to goods, and trying to ensure that the definition means inherently capable of distinguishing, which I gather from a technical perspective is not the case now. And Paul can help me out, but in terms of the industry's concern, we have only heard from one stakeholder, and so we're taking that into account.
So just to echo both the deputy and the minister, there's no intention to change the definition of distinctiveness at all. It was a purely modernization of the language. So inherently capable of distinguishing is actually viewed as a modern synonym for what the Act says now is distinctive, which is that a good is adapted so as to distinguish. We looked at jurisprudence, and so in a number of cases we found over 40 court decisions, in fact, where the courts had used the new language, inherently capable of distinguishing, as a way of explaining to modern audiences what the old language meant. And so we, just to be 100% clear, there was never any intention to change the policy. We've heard what the concerns are from the generic industries, but it is not a change in the policy intent of that language. It's a synonym.
Thank you very much, Mr. Luke. And Madam Scrow, that concludes our 7-minute round. We'll go to our 5-minute round now, and over to Madam Gallant for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question goes to Section 44 under the subject no liability. It reads, 4408 reads, neither Her Majesty nor a customs officer is liable for any loss or damage suffered in relation to the enforcement or application of sections 4401, 4404, 4406 because of the detention of copies of a work or other subject matter, and B and C. Would you first of all explain to me what that means and then why it's there?
Go ahead. Good morning, guys. So I can. So the section basically says that the Crown does not have liability if it fails to retain copies of works that are passing through. This is a discretionary authority that the government has at the border to stop infringing goods. So to the extent that they don't stop infringing goods and they move across the border, then there's no Crown liability on it.
So this is, Mr. Chairman, not the goods that are seized, and they're not the suspicious goods that they aren't responsible for. It's the goods that make it past the border officials. Okay. Secondly, does the enforcement of this bill begin and end at the borders, or if counterfeit goods are known or found on store shelves, do investigations into the origins of these knockoffs, are they permitted under this legislation?
Well, from an enforcement standpoint, any complaint that we would receive, we would assess on a priority basis as to whether there's further investigation required. So I guess the short answer is any investigation is potential. That if we know there's counterfeit goods out there, we'll take the complaint and assess the level of enforcement that we'll take there.
Okay, thank you. So it's not just at the border. Now, back to my colleague's question about electrical parts. Are the Canada Border Security agents looking for CSA stickers? What are they looking for on electrical components? How would the average consumer, or an electrician for that matter, know if they had an unauthentic part?
What we will do between the time that this bill gets royal assent and the coming into force, we will work with the industry to try to develop that training guide to help our officers to detect and interdict those goods. The industry out there has the ability, has the expertise, and we will leverage that into what essentially will become the training package of our frontline vis-a-vis those new responsibilities. So this will need to be built over time.
Okay, and part of this is consumer awareness. Is it the role of your organization to increase awareness on the part of the general public as to what is or is not a knockoff or a counterfeited article?
Well, it's not the role of the CBSA, but I think working in partnership with the colleagues from the RCMP and the colleagues from industry, I think we can use what we see at the border to feed into.
I think specifically the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, which is part of the Department of Industry, would be undertaking an education initiative around this act.
Sometimes, as I see here, sometimes it's easier to find a counterfeit good, a little easier to find some than others, like Duracell batteries with an extra L. It's a bit of a tell. So consumers can point that out, notify the shop owner, make sure the shop owner knows that they're doing something that they may or may not be aware of is violating other people's property rights, and the rights holders can then exercise their rights.
About 20 seconds.
Okay, and reference is made to there being a registrar of Register of Trademarks and of transfers, disclaimers, etc. So is that the Canadian registrar or the international registrar that it is referring to?
Canadian registrar.
Thank you.
Madam Gallant. Now on to Mr. Thibault for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister and witnesses, for being here today. So through you, Mr. Chair, we at this committee had the fortunate, or I guess the unfortunate, experience of seeing a Canada Goose jacket come around the table, and it was counterfeit, and we were told that many of these jackets are full of animal feces and chicken parts, and it's quite grotesque when you think about the toxins that are going into a lot of these products that are coming across the border. And needless to say, let alone the fact that we tell consumers what's in it, many consumers still buy these products because they think they're getting a good deal despite the health ramifications. However, Bill C-8 does include certain consumer exemptions, particularly when it comes to personal use, meaning that items in one's possession or baggage will not be subject to penalties under the Act. So maybe you, Minister, or you can pass it off to one of your witnesses, can explain how these exemptions will work in practice. So, for instance, if an individual is found to be in possession of, let's say, one of those unfortunate jackets, will they be subject to penalties under this Act?
They will not if it's for personal use, but the person who sold it to them would be. And if they were to resell it, that would be illegal.
Okay. So if, for example, then I believe Mr. Nubley mentioned something in relation to e-commerce shipments. So if the package then comes from China and what's in there is just one counterfeit item, does the bill even apply in that instance?
Sorry, say the scenario again?
So if I was to, well, not me personally, but if someone was to order something from...
This guy I know.
Need to be very clear on that. Order something from China and there's only one counterfeit item in that package that's delivered from China. Does the bill even apply in that instance?
Yeah, it would depend on the context. The idea is if it's for commercial purposes or for resale, then you would have a problem. But the right holder would have the ability to exercise their rights, and a court would decide whether or not you've infringed.
Thank you. So does the Act spell out the specific criteria to differentiate between personal use and potentially criminal actions, or will the determination be made on a case-by-case basis with subjective tests being applied?
Like our copyright legislation, from time to time it would come into case by case. Other times it's self-evident. But I think that's the answer.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Just to add something on that point. So there, as the Minister noted, there is a personal exemption that's very clear in the Act. So if an individual ordering a single item would not have it stopped, could not be charged under the Act. However, if through an investigation there was say an exporter that was consistently sending counterfeit goods into Canada one package by one package, if the investigating authorities became aware over time that there was clearly an exporter who was counterfeiting goods and sending them into Canada, albeit one package at a time, then that could be a justification for a criminal investigation under the Act.
That was exactly what my next question was going to be, is if consumer A keeps just ordering one package from China with one item in it, but he gets that package every day, then the bill will apply.
Exactly. So I was speaking about the exporter coming in, but if it's an individual who is a consumer, but is consistently ordering over a period of time one package, it's simply the exact same principle would apply. It could tip from being a personal exemption under the Act to being something that is of commercial scale.
And I know, Minister, you've brought some of what we've heard are dangerously counterfeit goods like batteries, electrical equipment. I know some of my colleagues have talked about pharmaceutical drugs that are making their way into legitimate supply chains and ending up on retailers' shelves. So can we hear how will Bill C-8 protect Canadian consumers that unknowingly purchase potentially dangerous counterfeit products found in some of the largest retail chains?
Well, it's the simple fact that the sale of such goods would be criminal. Yeah,
So, for example, we heard about the dollar store earlier. If the dollar store is unknowingly placing items on their shelf, who will do the investigation to say, well, it's not the dollar store necessarily, it was someone else who sold it to the dollar store? Who's doing that investigation?
Police would do the investigation. The rights holders would trigger the investigation. The courts would determine wrongdoing, and the courts would equally determine the penalty.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thibault. And now on to Mr. Jean for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for the opportunity today. I was wondering if I could find out more in relation to the most popular things that are copied, which I understand are clothing and shoes, and why those particular items are copied primarily, and then where these come from around the world.
It's hard to give you the answer on that, other than perhaps our youth are attracted to apparel and shoes. Speaking specifically where they come from around the world, we've got them from a number of different countries, but I don't think there's one sole country that is responsible for exporting all of these counterfeit goods. They can come from a number of different countries.
What would be 3 of the most predominant countries that would come to mind?
We've seen a significant amount of goods come from China, some goods from India, and beyond that, I'd be going deep into my brain trying to come up with another one for you. But, there are one-offs. Some countries such as Indonesia, we've seen some seizures. So it's coming from a number of countries. It's not just one country that's responsible for this. And sometimes it may be transshipped through those countries. So we have to be careful how we sort of couch where they are specifically coming from.
I would suggest to you that it's probably the margins, the markups on clothes, etc. You can usually, in these third world countries, I understand you can make clothing much cheaper than you actually buy it for, sometimes 1,000% margin, etc. Is there a lot of pressure that's put on by our government to these other countries that are homes to the manufacturing industry that are letting this happen? Because I could imagine that most of these countries have licensing provisions, either state or municipal licensing provisions. Are there not things we can do as a country, or as more developed countries, the G8, for instance, G7, that could put pressure and exert pressure on these countries to stop that type of thing? Has that been done, or is that being done?
I think that's a question probably better suited for the Minister of the Government. It's not law enforcement's interest there.
The rate of growth at 400% is certainly an area of concern. However, this is an argument for what we announced, Canada-Europe trade agreement. You have rules-based trade, and you have enforcement mechanisms, and buyers and sellers are both equally empowered. This is a good thing. It draws in the intellectual property regimes of all countries. I mean, one of the precursors for the Canada-Europe trade agreement, as you know, was the modernizing copyright legislation as well. I mean, the idea of having rules around the way in which goods are made, engineered, and protected domestically in both trading nations is an area of constant concern, and those boxes have to be checked before trade agreements are even entertained. So, constant source of engagement.
Well, I certainly, in closing, congratulate the government for putting this together. I think it's all about protecting consumers, and I think we're doing that with this legislation. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dean. And now on to Manafwash for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Minister and other officials for appearing today to speak to the copyright bill before us. As the Minister stated in his opening remarks, over the past 7 years, there has been an increase in the deliveries of counterfeit goods that have been intercepted. It's gone from $7 million to 38. So a 400% increase. If there's been such a big increase over the past 7 years, and if the government has studied this, then why has nothing been actually done in terms of amending the Act over the past 7 years? Well, that's not the case, actually. We did have the Copyright Modernization Act. This government put that forward. That has to do with domestic copyright. We've also amended other acts in order to be able to protect consumers and creators. And this is the next stage of that process. We brought this bill forward after consultations and discussions, and in our opinion, we'll be able to act under this bill. It's a balanced bill. It strikes a balance between consumers' rights, and it also allows us to act effectively. You said that it provides the necessary sums in order to be able to ensure that you'll be able to act. But at the same time, you stated earlier, there would be no increase in resources, whether those be financial resources or numbers of border officials. Now, my riding neighbors on the border with the United States, and there was customs that was abolished there at the border. And so it's become much more difficult to intercept people or goods coming in. Now, a greater effort will have to be made in order to be able to intercept counterfeit goods. So I'd like to know if you are going to make it a priority for those goods that are most harmful to the health and safety of the public. No doubt we will. And that's not just one decision that has to be made, even though we're all concerned about it. And you have a riding that is on the border with the United States. And so we'll expect people to express their concerns, and then it will be up to our officials to decide what the best way to act is. And perhaps Mr. Budzik would like to comment. You know, there are over 5,600 officials that work at various entry points. Just to give you an idea of what's going on, there are about 27,000 commercial shipments across the border on a daily basis, 9,000 through airports, and 5,400 that go through shipments arriving into ports. There were 14.2 million shipments last year, and more than 237,000 inspections were made. So this bill will become a priority of our border officials and the border agency. And, you know, in the context of the numbers that I've just given you, you can see that this is already a part of our reality. So we will draw on the expertise of copyright holders and of our officials, and we will be able to act and detain those shipments that we feel are questionable. And we will defer to our colleagues from the RCMP as well when we feel that these shipments pose a threat to the health and safety of our citizens. Thank you, Mr. Bolduc. Now, you said that there are inspections. Let's say that there are increased costs associated with shipments that are questionable and that have been detained. Let's say in the end that they're detained by mistake. Who will be responsible for paying the costs of detaining those goods? Well, they have to be stored. When they're commercial shipments, there is storage involved, and that's a private sector responsibility. So there are these storage areas, and they are private property. And so we already do this kind of thing when shipments are detained. Under the bill, the border agency will be able to act when they suspect that there's an illegitimate shipment. And we will be able to contact the rights holders and legally detain those shipments for 10 days. And the copyright holders then will have time to begin proceedings. So the cost of storage already are included in the cost of importing, and that will be managed by the private individuals, not by the border agency. Thank you, Mr. Bolduc.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the Minister and our guests. This is actually my first meeting where I've had the opportunity of witnesses in the same room as the newest member of the committee. So I'm struck by how critically important this issue is for all Canadians. And Minister, I was particularly struck when you were making your formal comments about the extent of the problem, that over 7 years the problem has increased from some $7.6 million up to some $38 million of retail value seized. What I'm curious about, if that's the value that's seized, do we have any sense out there of how large this problem is, knowing that that's the amount that we've actually taken in?
Good question, and perhaps Mr. Bolduc can speak at greater length on that, but I do have some stats here globally. It's quite interesting given what I've used as a reference about our trade opportunities. Studies from the OECD suggest that there's been an increase in the trade in counterfeit and pirated goods globally from $200 billion in 2005 to $250 billion in 2007. So just in 2 years, that increase. In 2012, border officials from the European Union detained over 90,000 shipments containing almost 40 million articles. This represents a retail value of almost 900 million euros, or 1.3 billion Canadian dollars, and that's the European market. So it is a global problem. It's not just a Canadian one, and those with whom we are now trading have stepped up, have their regimes in place, have legislation that's necessary, and their border agencies have the authority. And by the way, I've been at it for a very long time with modernized tools in a way that I think it's time we step forward and do ourselves.
So it then prompts the question you touched on CETA, and you made this comment again in your formal remarks. I also sit on the Standing Committee for International Trade, and we're pleased finally that CETA has been signed. We look forward to its passage. But I wonder how the liberalization of this trade agreement with 28 more countries make it that much more challenging to enforce. I'm trying to get a sense of what we might anticipate as the cooperation with the European Union, and how not just how challenging it might be to implement, but maybe going the other way. How much easier, or how does this legislation facilitate our ability to stop counterfeit goods?
Well, it gives us the ability to, again, leverage the expertise that the rights holder have, but also draw on colleagues from other border management organizations around the world, with who we have a long-standing working relationship. United States, Australia, leverage the World Customs Organization to see and get a sense from them what is out there, and align the tools and the training package that we will provide to our frontline based on their knowledge. And that's one of the good things when you can use the good and the bad of others in building what you expect to be an effective and efficient system.
Minister, I've heard a couple of members opposite make reference through their comments. They're concerned about the challenges not just associated with training, but whether there's an adequacy of funding for folks to do their job. I wonder if you could make it clear in terms of your comments how strongly you feel if the current budget is sufficient to allow our members of CBSA and RCMP who go associated with that to not only do their training but to do their job.
I do have confidence in that. As I gather, Ms. Charlton put a motion before the committee to have Minister Blaney come before the committee. He can speak in more detail about the Department of Public Safety and their decision and allocation of resources. But I would also reiterate what I said, I think, in French, that we wouldn't bring forward legislation without having consulted the CBSA, without having done our due diligence to ensure that these new powers wouldn't be authorized without the adequate resource to see them realized on the ground in a practical way. And look, every organization out there wishes they had more funding. In governing, you have to make choices. CBSA has to make choices within its structure. We have a commitment as a government to balance the budget in 2015. We have limited tax resources coming in. We have to deploy them responsibly, and I have every confidence that CBSA can do their job, and by the way, perhaps even do their job more efficiently and better with these tools. Just as it's unfair to suggest that when we pass other legislation in the criminal justice area, if we increase penalties or we have more tools for the prosecution of certain criminals, it doesn't then necessarily mean, therefore, that the OPP needs to have an increase in its budget because we have different laws. No, we provide law enforcement with new legislation and new powers, sometimes resulting in a reduction of cost of investigation and ease of enforcement that allows them to do their jobs more efficiently.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Holder. Now on to Mr. Stewart for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And hello, Minister. Nice to talk to you in a room today, and often talk on the plane. It's a great pleasure, and thank you for the other witnesses. I just wanted to follow up a couple questions about enforcement Mr. Holder and Ms. Charlton were asking. So I was looking at the Treasury Board reports on personnel, and it said that in 2012, the CBSA employed 14,710 staff, which is an increase, like you mentioned, from 2006. But in 2013, the CBSA only employed 14,218 staff, which is it's a cut of 500 personnel from the roles. And I'm just wondering, perhaps, if you expect that trend to continue, and it does seem odd to put a whole bunch of new responsibilities, but you have 500 fewer people to carry out these responsibilities. So just wondering if you might want to comment on that.
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, our frontline officers have remained constant, 5,600 or so. In the drop reductions, there was no impact at the front line, so we are confident. Again, this is the reality of the CBSA every day. Process information, refer expedition for shipments for examination, detain, and take proper action. So with a budget of over $1.6 billion, which is reflected in the main estimate, we are in fact very confident that we will be able to leverage those new authorities and this new tool to better protect les Canadiens et les Canadiennes.
But with all respect, I mean, you can see our concern. We're supportive. Our side is supportive of this legislation coming forward, and we're glad it's here at committee. We share your concerns, but we have Mr. Alden talked about the cuts to the budget and now finding 500 fewer staff. You can see our concerns here that perhaps you want to revisit the resourcing of this, and you may need to add more resources.
As I said, if you wish to put those questions to Minister Blaney, that's great. But we also share concerns as a government of arriving at a balanced budget, doing so responsibly, and we think that having no reduction, as was mentioned in frontline border services and their capacities, is a responsible way in which to arrive at a balanced budget, to meet our commitments to shrink government spending in a responsible way while still realizing the needs for public safety.
Thanks. Second,
and I do appreciate your support.
Thank you. The second question I have is just specifically on the Port of Vancouver, and it touches both of our ridings. Last year we had 2.7 million containers come through the port. I'm just wondering what percentage of these roughly would have been manually searched? Because that's what we're going to have to do with these counterfeit goods, is we're going to have to manually search a lot of these containers. I'm just wondering if you can tell us what percentage were manually searched, and if perhaps that's going to increase under this new legislation.
I don't have the specific data for last year, but physical inspection ranges from leveraging technology, X-rays, what we call a vacuum machine. We're able to see the inside of a container. Also doing open the doors and we verify the content of the container, or a full offload of a container. So I don't have the specific numbers for last year. If the chair would agree, I would gladly provide those numbers.
We've also deployed that technology not just to the Port of Vancouver, but also the Port of Prince Rupert. It was one of the main additions when we built the container terminal there and expanded it, and they have more plans for greater growth with dedicated roads where they have that kind of instant X-ray scanning of the containers coming in. It's now considered core and basic infrastructure at these ports.
So we welcome the figures. I'm just wondering, just in a rough estimate, though, do you think that you'd be opening more containers or inspecting more containers with this legislation? Is that your estimate?
We will have to include those new responsibilities in our targeting priorities. And again, I think in the large number of inspection we do, we are confident that we will be able to assume the responsibility and what is asked of the CBSA.
Still going? Okay. One last question then. I have just sticking with Port of Metro. Oh, sorry.
Can I just add that I think it is important to stress that it's not just the responsibility of CBSA or the RCMP to use the new tools. In fact, the objective of the bill is in fact to create a new framework which really gives new powers not just to CBSA and to the RCMP, but also to the rights holders themselves. And I think as Mr. Bolduc was raising earlier, part of the benefits of this will be actually to promote much more sharing of information between the rights holders, the manufacturers around these pirated goods and counterfeit goods. So the bill is actually designed to encourage this process that should lead to better results.
Thank you, Mr. Nubley. Mr. Stewart, now on to Mr. Warwalk for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Minister, and for the witnesses for being here. I want to focus on the detainment of goods. I had written down the question, how many days? I heard that it can be up to 10 days. That the cost to warehouse these detained goods was the private sector responsibility. So if you can explain how that works. There's a suspicion that there's these goods that a customs officer has seen as saying they may be counterfeit, so they are detained. The officer makes that decision to detain them. They're put in the warehouse, and you contact the rights holder to say, do you want to come and take a look at them? is the rights holder at that time paying to have these sit in a warehouse?
The importer would pay for the storage costs. The way that it works is the majority of the time these goods move from the border to, let's say, Montreal, inbound. So they move into on an inbound carrier. They're brought in a warehouse, which is a bounded warehouse. It is privately owned, but under CBSA authority. And based on the information provided by the importer, the Border Services officer would assess country of origin, importer, exporter, and so on and so forth, and would decide to do an examination. In doing the examination, if the officer has reasonable ground to believe that the goods could be counterfeited, then we'll take samples, pictures, we'll get back to the office, would query the system where we have requests for assistance, and if there is a request by right holder, then would contact that right holder and inform him that we have...
I've got that. Sorry for cutting you off, but I'm short. So the 10 days is 10 calendar days or 10 business days?
10 days as soon as we inform the right holders. Working days.
Okay, 10 working days. The rights of the rights holder to take action, a new civil cause of action. If you could elaborate on that. So they can take, the right holder can take action based on the manufacturing, possessing, importing, exporting, and attempting to export counterfeit goods. What does that look like? If there is a manufacturer in another country that is, and I'm going to give a hypothetical, that they produce a jersey legitimately, or a jacket legitimately under contract, and they fulfill that order of 10,000 gadgets. And then they've got everything set up, and then they make another 20, 30, 100,000 of those gadgets. But it's not under contract with anybody, therefore it could be a counterfeit. It may not create a risk, but it is owned, the rights of that are owned by maybe a Canadian company. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, legally, there's a difference between making a replica and making a product for counterfeit to be entered into the marketplace and doing commercial damage.
So the focus is, how does the right owner, is there agreements with other countries where this may be happening to make sure that the companies are not overproducing so they do not have excess product that could wiggle its way into our country and create big problems? It may not create a safety issue, but it's a copyright, it's a rights issue.
Are you speaking of then legally produced goods in foreign markets, so parallel imports, like so that the exporter in the situation you're describing owns the IP, has the rights to produce it for the territory within which the manufacturing takes place?
In my scenario, they do not have the rights to make overproduce, but they have the equipment, the capability to do it, and so just in efficiencies, they overcreate and sell it to somebody to import into Canada as a counterfeit product.
So in that situation, then, so that's a clearly infringing illegal product, and the first time that Canadian authorities would have the ability to stop it would be when it came into the country. We would not be in a situation to stop manufacturing. The bill applies also to exports leaving Canada, right? So Canada is not only an importer of counterfeit goods, there are exports happening as well, and so that's where you're looking at the other causes of action. So if there's a manufacturing facility in Canada that is illegally producing a good, then that's where the causes of action that a rights holder in Canada could pursue.
Mr. Warwa, you're at 5:25, so we're going to mark you at 5 minutes because the next round is coming up and it's Conservative first, so you have 25 seconds into your next round. Go ahead, Mr. Warwa.
I don't think so. Oh, thank you. My question was, can they take action outside of Canada? is there international agreements that
Only
go?
importing and exporting to and from Canada.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good question.
I'm all done. Thank you.
All right. Now, Mr. Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to kind of follow up on that a little bit. So, Paul, maybe you could elaborate on this export impact for Canadian companies, or not Canadian companies. I guess it would be well, they could be companies, but those who might be creating counterfeit goods in Canada and then exporting them. How does this bill impact that?
So just in the ways that actually the honourable member's question exposed. So to the extent that illegally produced product, counterfeit product by a manufacturer in Canada that doesn't have the right to produce it, could also impact a Canadian innovator who does have that right. It could also impact a foreign company that has rights to Canada and internationally for that product. So there's a kind of a good citizenship component to the bill as well, that it applies to exports as well as imports.
Okay. Maybe for those who might be watching the proceedings here and might not be IP experts or experts in the way the border works, maybe describe, if you could, someone, how the system works right now. How is it that counterfeit goods are identified at the border right now, and what happens? Maybe what are the shortcomings in that system?
Right now, our officers from time to time do find counterfeit goods, but the CBSA has no authority to detain or seize those shipments. The big advantage of the proposed bill is that will give us the ability to be able to detain and in partnership with the right holder, be able to confirm if they are in fact illegal, well, not illegal, but counterfeit goods. So today, when counterfeit goods are declared, they're declared as a sweater or a shirt, or there's no difference when we process the information, because we have no authority to detain those goods. And in some cases, right holders will go to court and get a court order to get the assistance of the CBSA in maybe targeting a specific exporter, a specific expedition shipment, and we do cooperate with stakeholders on when we are mandated by the court to do so. So for CBSA, we value and looking forward to those new authorities that will help us protect those copyrights.
So in layman's terms, right now, what types of action can you take? And maybe you could clearly differentiate from the types of actions that you can't take but will be able to take with the new act. Just in a way, again, that a regular person around the dinner table might understand this.
Okay. Well, take the example of sweater. Right now, there's nothing the CBSA can do. If we go with goods that could represent a danger for the safety and security of Canadians, then CBSA has the ability to refer and seek the help of the RCMP or Health Canada. And we do so on a daily basis because we have MOUs with these two organizations. That's today. Tomorrow, the CBSA will be able to detain the expedition, get information, validate that information with the right holders, have the right holders seek relief with the courts, or in cases of product that could represent a danger, the safety and security, or for shipments who believe criminal organization could be behind this, refer those cases to the RCMP for further investigations.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Now we'll move on to the NDP again. Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I've got a number of questions, so I'll try and be really quick about them. First one is, did you consult with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business around this bill? One of the things that I'm concerned about is that if there's an investigation at the retail level about possible counterfeit products, and in the end you find that those products actually weren't counterfeit, the shop owner in the meantime would have been responsible for paying for expenses through, for example, the investigative process, but also potentially through court proceedings until the final determination is made. For some small businesses, that may lead to serious financial hardship to their business. And so I just wonder whether you had had an opportunity to consult on that aspect of the bill with CFIB, but others representing small and perhaps even medium-sized businesses.
We heard from CFIB and we heard from retailers, and they are supportive of the bill. I mean, the issue around, I think that you're pointing to is small and medium-sized companies that may not have the resources to, or less resources to participate in the system at the border regime right now. That's just the focus of your question?
Well, I'm concerned because the remedy that this bill provides, as I understand it, is that there may be reimbursement at the end of the court proceedings to those businesses, but that suggests that at the front end, small businesses will have to pay those expenses out of pocket, and you know how tight the margins are for many of those businesses, so I'm just concerned about their viability as the investigation is occurring, particularly if the finding is that the products weren't counterfeit.
It's seen as a net benefit. There could be a cost in enforcement, yes, but the net benefit is they can go after those who have abused the privilege of having their products in their stores and prosecute. And rights holders can defend themselves. So it's seen as a net benefit.
Can I just ask, the other part that I'm not understanding fully is, I know that you've presented us with data about the increase in number of counterfeit goods seized, but that's goods seized. We don't actually have very reliable data on what the overall cost, the economic impact is, what the overall size of the problem is, what the overall impact on health and safety issues is. Do you have reliable data on that? And, you know, in short, why are we doing this? We obviously think there's a bigger problem out there. What is that problem, and what's the magnitude of that problem?
Well, CBSA has no specific data as to, again, we have no authority to take action today. What we will do, though, is and we already started doing that, is engage with other customs organization to get a sense as to what they are seeing. As you know, many countries have IP legislation, and be able to get a sense as to exactly what the problem is.
Thank you. So we don't actually know, we can't quantify the problem, but we're offering a solution.
Well,
okay.
But it's a Chris, with respect, it's a self-evident problem, because if you look at the internet, the stuff where we do know where there are prosecutions in Canada, but beyond that, as I said, the European numbers, there's three numbers that are relevant because they are now our trading partners. As I said, the European Union detained over 90,000 shipments containing 40 million articles of an estimated value of 900 million euros. In the United States, U.S. government numbers, U.S. customs officials in 2012 almost reached 23,000. This represents a retail value of $1.2 billion, average seizure of more than $10,000. And this is from the Japanese government. The survey report on loss caused by counterfeiting, which is a report by the government of Japan, over one out of every five Japanese companies had sustained losses from counterfeiting in 2011. And I remind you that Japan is a centerpiece country, by the way, of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement as well, right? So this is a growing problem of international consequence.
Yeah, and I don't deny that the problem is real. I'm just trying to get a handle on what the magnitude is. And just when you're talking about other governments and their reports, there is one report that says that folks in a Chinese prison are making fake PlayStation 3s. So the government, at least tacitly, is aware of what they're doing there. Do we have any bilateral agreements with other countries? Because it seems to me that we can go after manufacturers of these goods in Canada, but we don't have any jurisdiction to go after manufacturers in other countries. So is the enforcement really only on the retailer on the Canadian side? What are we doing to go after the manufacturers? Do we have international agreements?
Well, we're the government of Canada. We're not the government of other countries.
Exactly.
But you're correct. that bilateral trade agreements that are rules-based, that enforce international laws, are good things, which is why we're proud to be a party that supports free trade.
With China.
Very much, Madam Charlton. Now on to the Conservative Party and Mr. McCallman.
Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you. Just wanted, I think Mr. Halucha had a comment to make, and you didn't get a chance to make it at the end of Mr. Lake's questioning. Do you recall that, and is there something that you wanted to add to that?
Sure, thank you.
Discussion?
Thank you, sir. The point I was going to make is just in terms of how powerful the new system will be in terms of getting information to Canadian rights holders who otherwise wouldn't have it. So just in terms of what there was discussion around what the process is for to get a border agent right now to take action in the case of a counterfeit good coming in. And right now, the rights holder has to have information in advance of the location. They need to know where it's coming into the country. They need to know what it is, and they need to know when it's coming in. And all of those then, they only can actually get action from CBSA. Like, that's all that CBSA is permitted to do if they receive a court order. So it's extremely limited. So in fact, the ability that CBSA agents will have in order to share information when they have suspicious good will be extremely powerful in terms of enabling Canadian companies to protect their IP.
And that's exactly kind of the questioning I wanted to go down, was about the infringement of their IP and their brand identities. From the witnesses we had, and Canada Goose is kind of set out there as the kind of iconic brand that is being infringed upon, the expense right now to significant brands is large in their business models. And I'm wondering if you could give us a sense in your discussions with them and consultations with them throughout this, how you, not only the cooperation you're receiving, but also any sense of the kind of investments they're needing to make in order to ferret out the counterfeiters, counterfeiters all along the line, the manufacturers, the distributors, whether it involves organized crime or not. But this is a very large financial cost of doing business, is it not?
It absolutely is. And intellectual property is one of the most valued intangible assets of many companies. So the company's brand, I mean, you can lose a factory if something, if you have something negative happens in terms of a natural disaster. But having damage to your brand is something that's very, very difficult to withstand. And so they're extremely supportive of the measures that the government is bringing forward, and the fact that, in fact, the system that they will actually be paying in. It's a system that actually balances the government playing a role, establishing a framework, and as the gentleman from CBSA noted, rights holders will be paying to participate in that system and be part of it, and that's, I think, an indication of just how valuable it is. And just one statistic that always strikes me is that there's over 1 million trademarks that are registered in Canada, and that's because that really tells you how valuable they are to the companies that register them.
And that's exactly what we heard throughout the hearings we had with different manufacturers and different associations representing manufacturers. And I appreciate that question. I'm going to pass the rest of my time on to Madam Glant, my colleague to my right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, this bill grants extra powers to the CBSA agents as well as the trademark owners. What measures or restrictions are in place to ensure that these new powers are not abused?
These are powers that are principally for rights holders, and of course, by engaging CBSA in order to protect their rights, the CBSA operates within the context of the rule of law of which these new powers will be enforced. I'm not sure if you want to say something.
Yeah, we're guided by the Customs Act. In this particular case, the detention is for 10 days. There's a possibility to get an extension, but if within the first 10 days, business days, nothing happens, then the goods are released from CBSA detention. But we're guided by the Customs Act, which guides everything we do. Also, guided by Section 107 of the Act in information sharing with rights holder. So we feel we have the proper framework to be able to make this happen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baldick. Now on to Madam Scroll for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. If I could just finish the question that I didn't have enough time on the issue of distinctiveness. Is the case law that's currently there, will that be preserved? I mean, you indicated distinctiveness was just a modernization of a word. Will that have any implications on the current laws or any new subsections that would be produced?
So you're asking me to predict what the courts will do, which is always very difficult to do. We can only look backwards at what jurisprudence has told us.
Just with what you're with here, with C8, is it going to make any changes in the current case law?
Not in our view. Because we're basically replacing one phrase with a synonym that's more modern, that we're not. The view is that it's not going to make any changes. And if you look at, I mean, the concerns that generics have raised is around the size, the shape, the color of a pill or a medicine being trademarked. In fact, in the jurisprudence, the courts have been quite clear that what is of value, that drugs aren't prescribed because of a shape, size, color, or pill. They're prescribed because of a medicinal ingredient. And the medicinal ingredient is the basis for the distinctiveness of the product, not the dress of the product, which is its color, its shape, or its size.
But given the fact that the generic industry is a multi-billion-dollar business, it's an important industry to our country, and in dealing with the many health challenges, it's an important industry. So you say that in your opinion, but have you actually examined it and made sure that it is not going to have negative implications on that important industry?
We would absolutely. We would not have brought it forward as part of the bill had there been concerns that we were going to be changing outcomes from how the courts view trademarks.
So you're confident that we're not going to end up in court trying to argue over this word of distinctiveness and its impact on the industry?
Litigation the pharmaceutical industry is well known to be one of the more litigious in Canada, and I would not say that there's no chance, or that I would not want to put a number to the percentage of chance that there are suits as a result of this. But that's not the same thing as having court decisions that change. It's not the same thing as having the law change. The law is always tested, and mostly in any case, when you move forward with new legislation, the chances of you having law tested increases.
Simply put, though, I think we believe that this is truly just modernization of the language. And the legal risks are low.
I would hope that. But that whole issue, when we talk about counterfeiting clothing and other things, a major concern for all of us is the whole issue of counterfeiting drugs and taking a generic and making it look like a non-generic. I mean, we have people's health clearly in line there. How much is C8 going to be able to do there to make sure that's not happening and the consumers, again, are protected, because we're talking about a health issue?
I mean, I think that this Act is designed to put in place a new framework which addresses gaps that are currently in the system. So in the health and safety area, as in the other areas, it's a huge opportunity to learn more about what is actually happening on the ground with respect to this illicit activity. So clearly, Mr. Chair, health and safety is a key issue, and I think the Act is designed to try and do a better job and a more efficient job in terms of addressing the issues here.
And under the ACTA, what has the United States, have they ratified that agreement? Or anybody else that you're aware of?
This is not related to that. This is about domestic pressures, but it does bring our status quo in line with what other jurisdictions in the world are doing.
What other countries have ratified that agreement?
Sorry, a little bit noisy. Say that again.
What other countries have ratified that?
So the main agreement, I understand, Mr. Chair, is what's called ACTA, the Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Agreement, and it was signed in October 2011 by Australia, Canada, Japan, Morocco, New Zealand, Singapore, South Korea, and U.S. As the Minister has said, while this is domestically focused, this legislation brings us in line with that particular international agreement.
Thank you very much, Madam Sgro, Mr. Nubley. Now on to Mr. Holder for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and again to our guests, thank you. Minister, a favor, if I might. I'd get rid of the Crosby fake, but if you get an original, I'd appreciate it if you would pass it on to me, and you can give the electrical circuit gadget to the member from Brant, because he likes those kinds of things. You know, we've focused a lot on, we focus totally on goods that come out from outside Canada. But, you know, when we look at this, the bill is subnamed the Combating Counterfeit Products Act. Could you imagine a circumstance where we have the potential for counterfeiting in Canada? And if we do, how would this bill respond?
Well, we do. There are counterfeit goods that are created in Canada that are exported elsewhere in the world, and this combats that. I mean, again, this is about the importing and exporting of counterfeit goods, and so it's a legislation that covers both the push and pull of bogus products.
And I know we have representatives from the CBSA, but what about counterfeiting in Canada for goods that are distributed in Canada? Would that equally respond, Minister? Or could you imagine a circumstance where that might happen?
Sure. I'm sure there are examples.
I'm sorry, can you... Well, where there might be a good manufactured in Canada and a counterfeit good and distributed in Canada, if this bill would assist in terms of response, would the same regulations that apply that are intended to protect rights holders and all of the other circumstances associated with this bill apply?
That would not be associated with this bill. That would be associated with the Copyright Act, and we do have that. I mean, people take movies, burn them onto discs or put them onto thumb drives and circulate them around dorms and these types of things. And that does happen within Canada, and there are penalties that are in the Copyright Act as a result of our Copyright Modernization Act. So this is about, again, the importing and exporting. The domestic penalties and domestic regimes are there now.
So then what about the issue of counterfeit cigarettes, where they would come in from overseas, they might come in through the United States through various means across our borders? Again, this legislation would apply there?
It would. I'm sure. I think you're opening a big can of worms when it comes to the tobacco issue. But
I can't imagine I am.
But CBSA already focused with colleagues from the RCMP on cigarettes and counterfeited cigarettes, and we do have seizures happening. Not sure that this bill will particularly focus on cigarettes, but I do believe we have the tools we need to be able to take action.
Well, since I have the RCMP here as well, I would make the comment that that's obviously a very serious issue, and we know that it is. And again, I'd be curious, Mr. Slynn, if you might comment as to if this bill isn't the issue, what are some of the, and I don't want to get away from the point of this bill, but does it assist in tackling the very serious issue of illegal tobacco? When I say illegal, I'm talking about counterfeit specifically.
Absolutely. I think, as I pointed out earlier, you know, we focus on organized crime and the diversity of organized crime.
That becomes the issue.
It becomes the issue. This bill gives us that added tool, the flexibility to take shot at those organized crime groups that may be involved in cigarettes, drugs, contraband jerseys, whatever.
Well, if I might, and I appreciate you saying that, and I think we know that it's an extremely significant issue in this country. But, Minister, if I can, you know, my Cape Breton mom used to say that nothing is either good or bad except by comparison. So relative to the old law and what this is intended to do, if you could, for the purpose of the folks that are around this table, but also those who are listening into this session, what would you say are the most critical parts of this bill, the most salient pieces that someone could say, yes, that matters, and I'm glad the government is doing that because this impacts us?
When a business creates a product that they are planning to sell, either internationally or at home, and somebody is able to take that product, match its quality, have it manufactured in a cheaper jurisdiction somewhere else in the world, and bring it into the country and sell it at flea markets or sell it in dollar stores and undermine that business, and the product comes in, you can undermine and indeed collapse an entire idea that somebody has come up with. Worse, you can come up with a product and somebody can bring in a product that they can manufacture more cheaply from outside of the country, and they bring it in and there's lead in the toy, or there's mercury in it, or there's an electrical good that actually doesn't have a proper fuse in it, or that is not made of the proper plastic and can overheat and cause a fire, and that's being sold. So to the average citizen watching, what we're trying to do is to stop goods from coming into the country that would undermine and destroy small business, that would take away great ideas that are being thought of by Canadians, that are being implemented in the marketplace. And we're also trying to stop goods from coming into the country that would endanger their health and safety.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Holder. Now on to Mr. Thibault for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I guess, a couple of quick questions first for some clarification. So in this bill, if there's a larger product made, I'm going to use Sudbury, for example, when there's many mining supply and services companies and they make this great product, but within the product there are counterfeit items. What happens then? Is there a way to clarify that for us?
So if you had a widget and within the widget there were 9 pieces and 3 of the 9 pieces were counterfeit?
Yeah.
What would you do? I'll ask the enforcement guys.
Yeah.
Past experience tells us that the rights holder have a good intelligence network. As you know, they have specific suppliers, and again, it's hypothetical, but would probably leverage intelligence, both from the right holders, but also from other means, and for sure cooperate with colleagues from the RCMP.
I think that's critical. The level of intelligence sharing, not only domestically but internationally, is paramount for us to carry out effective and efficient investigations. And there's one aspect of this bill where CBSA can share that intelligence much more efficiently with us. So that becomes paramount. So if there's 3 out of 9 items, it gives us a better chance or a better footing to get started on an investigation that's going to have success.
So then does the widget maker, is he then, if he or she is shipping, let's say, 100 of these products, and once it's found, are they then detained and held and cash, costs, all of those type of things put back onto the business owner? Or is it you just look at the 3 and say send them back and replace? Like, what's the process there? I'm just trying to get an understanding.
Well, every investigation has its uniqueness, so it's as Martin has said, it's a hypothetical for us. So it would really depend on a number of factors, whether we're going to take further enforcement action, whether we're going to just say no. So it's a difficult question for me really to compartmentalize for you.
Thank you, sir. So I guess then, what is the range of fees being considered for a company to submit a request for assistance in order to have border officials seize goods infringing on their copyrights or trademarks? So how will this fee structure be balanced to ensure the small businesses will be able to have equal protection as large multinationals with far greater resources? Is it going to be a sliding scale? What type of things are being considered there?
Talk about the fees.
This is done at no cost. So providing a request for assistance, and Paul, weigh in if the information or the way to make a request for assistance is done at no cost for the rights holder. Storage costs, as I mentioned earlier, are part of the private sector, so CBSA has no say in those, and there's no cost for detention. that CBSA imposes on importer-exporter. So I don't know if you want to.
I just the one cost would be around the cost of storage and detention, and the bill does not contain an indication of what those costs are going to be. And I understand from CBSA that they're going to be doing consultations with stakeholders and you know, identifying what would be the appropriate scheme for the cost of entry into the regime.
So for clarification then, the tradition of intellectual property rights put the onus on enforcement on rights holders. And so is that staying the same? Is it reasonable to require rights holders to share the cost of enforcement? I think that's laid out in this bill.
They don't share the cost of enforcement, but it is upon them to demonstrate in court that their rights are being violated, as is the case with the Copyright Act in Canada.
Great. Thank you, Minister. How much time do I have, Chair? 1 more minute. My last brief question. Do we have any numbers of how many Canadian manufacturers have been convicted of importing or exporting counterfeited goods?
I don't have those figures.
No. They are out there. If you don't have them with you today, would we be able to get a report on that sent to the committee?
I could certainly look into getting those. I'm not aware if we have them or not, but I'll certainly endeavor to see if we can pull those for you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Thibault. So we're mindful of 2 undertakings, one by Mr. Bullock, one by Mr. Slynn, and once I get that information, then we'll distribute it amongst the committee if it's available in both cases. The Conservative Party has stood down for their rotation position, so we have the unusual luxury of being able to offer the Minister and his colleagues some closing remarks. So if you'd like to, if you have some closing remarks, Minister, we'll entertain them.
The only thing, first again, I'll close where I began, which is to thank the committee for having us all here. As I said, Minister Blaney would have been here along with me, and he accepted the invitation to come today. He would have been here, but I'm sure he'll revisit the legislation if you like. Second is we are sincere on the government side. If you have amendments that you think would strengthen the legislation, our side will certainly entertain those amendments, but let's do it quickly and get the bill back to the House.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and Minister, it's not lost on us that you did invest the full 2 hours here. We appreciate that very much, and so thank you very much to my colleagues. The meeting's adjourned.